unfolded mysteries. Nestled in the quiet corner of an old, forgotten estate, the portrait hung with an eerie grace. The mansion, known as Blackwood Manor, had long been abandoned, its wooden floors creaking under the weight of history. For generations, the estate had been the subject of rumors and ghostly tales. The portrait, however, remained a testament to a darker tale, which I was about to uncover. It was a sultry summer evening when I first laid eyes on the painting. My great-uncle, a reclusive man who had spent his life collecting rare and enigmatic artifacts, had passed away. His estate was left to me in his will. I had never met him and had little knowledge of the family history, but the promise of an ancestral mansion intrigued me. When I arrived, the house was in shambles, dust and cobwebs strewn across the ornate halls. The portrait in the main sitting room, however, remained untouched. The subject of the portrait was a striking woman, her auburn hair cascading like a waterfall, her eyes an intense shade of green that seemed to pierce through the canvas itself. Her attire was outdated, a dress that belonged to another century. Her name, according to a plaque beneath, was Eleanor Blackwood. The portrait exuded an eerie beauty, and it was impossible to resist its magnetic pull. As I settled into the mansion, the portrait seemed to watch over my every move. It wasn't long before I started hearing whispers in the night, soft and haunting, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. I traced the source of these whispers to the portrait. It was as though Eleanor's lips were moving, whispering secrets of a bygone era. Her eyes bore into mine, holding me captive. My obsession grew. I found myself returning to the portrait, unable to look away. I felt compelled to speak to it, to unravel its secrets. One moonlit night, in a fit of desperation, I reached out and touched the canvas. A shock of icy cold coursed through my hand, and the room seemed to twist, the walls melting away like wax. Suddenly, I was transported to a time long past, to a grand ballroom brimming with life. I watched as Eleanor waltzed gracefully with a man in military attire. The entire room alive with laughter and music. It was a night of grandeur, but beneath the surface, there was an unspoken sadness, a lingering melancholy. The room seemed to shift back to its dilapidated state, and I was returned to the present. It was then that I realized the portrait held a part of Eleanor's soul, forever trapped in its frame. Desperate to release her from her spectral prison, I sought out old records of the estate. Eleanor's story unfolded before me. She had been a young woman in love with the military man she danced with that fateful night, Captain Alexander Wainwright. Their love was forbidden, and their families had conspired to keep them apart. The tragic climax of their story, a duel that left Alexander dead and Eleanor heartbroken, had marked the estate with a curse. I embarked on a quest to find a way to set Eleanor free. It led me through ancient rituals and mystic symbols, each step bringing me closer to unlocking the portrait's secrets. I could feel Eleanor's presence growing stronger, as if she was guiding me. Her love and longing imbued the house with a strange, ethereal energy, and the air grew heavy with the weight of history. Finally, after months of research, I stood before the portrait with a renewed sense of purpose. With trembling hands, I performed the final ritual. A blinding light emanated from the painting as a spectral figure emerged from the canvas. It was Eleanor, no longer confined by the frame that had held her for so long. She looked at me with gratitude and sadness, her eyes finally at peace. As her spirit dissipated into the air, the mansion seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. The portrait remained, but it no longer whispered in the night. The haunting presence had been laid to rest, and the estate was finally free from the torment that had plagued it for centuries. The tale of Eleanor's release from her portrait's curse became a local legend, and the mansion, now a historical site, stood as a testament to the power of love and the enduring bonds that transcend time. But I knew the truth. The bond between the living and the departed was a fragile one, and some stories were better left untold. The old secluded cabin in the woods had always been my secret retreat from the chaos of city life. Nestled deep within a dense forest, it was miles away from civilization, making it the perfect place to escape the daily grind. I had visited this cabin countless times, and each visit had been peaceful and uneventful until one ominous weekend. The autumn winds carried a chill that seemed to penetrate my very soul. The cabin's only source of warmth was the crackling fire in the hearth, which provided solace from the howling wind outside. As I lay in the cabin's creaking bed, I heard a faint whispering that I initially dismissed as the rustling of leaves against the window panes. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more persistent. An eerie sense of unease settled in, and I decided to investigate. I slipped out of bed, shivering both from the cold and fear. The whispering was unmistakable now, almost like a chorus of hushed voices conspiring in the darkness. I approached the window with trepidation and peered through the frosted glass. To my shock, I saw a group of figures standing around the cabin, their backs turned toward me. They were cloaked in shadow, their faces hidden from view. My heart pounded like a drum as I strained to make out their hushed words. They were chanting something in a language I couldn't comprehend, something guttural and ancient. Torn between curiosity and terror, I slowly unlocked the door and stepped outside. The forest was bathed in eerie moonlight, casting long, sinister shadows. As I approached the figures, their whispering ceased abruptly. It was then that they turned toward me in eerie unison. Faces, if you could call them that, were absent. Their skin was stretched tightly over their bone structure, featureless except for empty eye sockets that seemed to bore into my very soul. My legs quivered, and I tried to retreat, but an unseen force held me in place. These pale, eyeless beings began to drift toward me, moving with a fluidity that defied the laws of nature. Panic surged within me, and I cried out for mercy. But the haunting figures were relentless. Their cold, eyeless gazes locked onto me. In a final, desperate act, I lunged backward and managed to break free from their invisible grasp. I sprinted back into the cabin, locking the door behind me. The cabin's solitude, which had once been a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The whispering outside grew louder, more menacing. The walls seemed to vibrate. We hope you enjoyed those spine-tingling tales as much as turned frigid. I huddled, still feeling a little spooked crucifix I had found among the cabin's belongings. Before we say goodbye for salvation, we have a few things to ask. Felt like an eternity as the unseen entities continued their sinister vigil. As chilling as when dawn finally broke, really helps our cabin's surroundings were empty and serene. Subscribe and turn on terrors had vanished as if they had never existed. There are plenty more eerie adventures I had faced a nightmare or some unexplainable malevolence lurking. Share this video with your friends. And though I left that cabin, I never found answers. After all, the memory of those eyeless, pale figures haunts me. That's a wrap for today. But stay tuned for more bone-chilling content. The cabin that had once been my refuge. Until next time, is now a place of dread. Your flashlight handy, lost to your wits about you, and that still lurks in the dark recesses of the forest. The experience for joining that cabin haunted me for months. I couldn't shake the feeling that something otherworldly had transpired. See you in the next video. The image of those eyeless figures, their unnatural movements, and the eerie chants they uttered tormented my thoughts. I decided to share my story with a close friend, Alex, who had a keen interest in the supernatural. As I recounted the events, Alex's eyes widened with both fascination and concern. He suggested that we investigate further, hoping to uncover the mystery behind the sinister entities that had invaded my peaceful retreat. We spent weeks researching local legends, folklore, and the history of the forest. It was during our investigations that we stumbled upon an old diary belonging to a hermit who had lived in the area decades ago. The diary was filled with cryptic entries, mentioning strange rituals, dark forces, and a hidden portal to another realm within the forest. Armed with this new information, we felt compelled to return to the cabin. This time we were prepared. We gathered an assortment of protective amulets, salt, and various ancient incantations meant to ward off malevolent entities. Our journey into the woods was fueled by a mix of curiosity, fear, and determination. Upon arriving at the cabin, the eerie atmosphere was as potent as ever. We immediately set up a protective barrier around the cabin, creating a circle of salt and lighting protective candles. As night fell, we heard the first faint whispers, just as I had on that fateful night. This time we were ready. Armed with our amulets and incantations, we confronted the shadowy figures. As we approached, the entities turned to face us, their eyeless gazes filled with a mixture of curiosity and menace. They began their guttural chanting, but this time we responded with incantations of our own. The forest seemed to come alive with energy, the very air crackling with the clash of supernatural forces. The pale figures writhed in pain, their forms distorting as if they were being torn apart by unseen forces. In a final burst of energy, they dissipated into a cloud of dark mist, vanishing into the night. The woods fell silent, and the cabin's surroundings were peaceful once more. We had confronted the malevolent entities and banished them from the cabin. The curse that had plagued this place for years was broken. It was a triumphant moment, but we knew that we had only scratched the surface of the forest's mysteries. As we continued our research, we discovered that the hermit mentioned in the diary had once sought to harness the power of the otherworldly portal hidden within the forest. He had conducted dark rituals and sacrifices, unleashing forces he could not control. The eyeless entities were the result of his reckless actions, trapped in a liminal space between our world and theirs. We decided to explore the portal the hermit had written about, hoping to close it and prevent any further disturbances. Our journey took us deep into the heart of the forest, where we encountered strange phenomena, ancient runes and symbols etched into the trees. At last, we came upon the hidden gateway. It was an eerie, shimmering tear in reality, and we could sense the malevolence emanating from it. With great trepidation, we chanted incantations and performed a ritual to close the portal. The forest around us seemed to respond, and the gateway slowly began to seal itself. The air crackled with energy as the portal closed, and we knew that the threat had been contained. Our adventures in the forest had been harrowing and otherworldly, but they had also brought a sense of closure. The cabin, once a place of fear, had been restored to its former peace. We left the woods with a newfound respect for the mysteries of the natural world and a deeper understanding of the power of ancient rituals and incantations. To this day, the memory of those eyeless, pale figures and the mysteries of the secluded cabin linger in my mind. Alex and I had succeeded in banishing the malevolent entities and closing the portal to another realm within the forest. The cabin, once a place of fear and dread, had been restored to its former peace. Over time, the forest reclaimed its serene beauty, and the old cabin served as a reminder of the strange and supernatural. I never ventured back into those woods, content to leave the mysteries undisturbed. The experience had left me with a profound respect for the unknown and a lasting fascination with the supernatural. As the years passed, Alex and I continued our investigations into the supernatural, exploring other enigmatic places and confronting otherworldly phenomena. The knowledge we had gained from our encounter in the cabin was invaluable, and we used it to help others who faced similar hauntings and paranormal experiences. The secluded cabin in the woods became a legend in the local community, a place where the boundary between our world and the otherworldly had been breached and then sealed. It served as a stark reminder of the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human comprehension. Though the eyeless figures had faded into memory, their existence remained a mystery that haunted my thoughts. I knew that the supernatural world was vast and filled with secrets, and I couldn't help but wonder what other enigmas lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered by those daring enough to seek them out. And so, the story of the old secluded cabin in the woods came to a close, but it left an indelible mark on my life, a testament to the enduring power of the unknown and the courage to confront it. In the heart of a picturesque countryside, where rolling hills met the sky and the songs of birds serenaded the air, there was a secluded cottage hidden away from the world. In this cottage, surrounded by a garden that bloomed with a riot of colors, lived an elderly woman named Eleanor. She was known far and wide for her mysterious music box, a treasured heirloom that had been passed down through generations. Eleanor's music box was an ornate, handcrafted piece of art, encrusted with jewels and intricately designed. It was said to have been created by a famous musician, but it held more than just the beauty of its craftsmanship. When the music box was wound, its melodic tunes were said to transport the listener to a different world, a world of enchantment and dreams. Eleanor had kept the music box in her family for as long as anyone could remember, and she held the secret to its enchantment. She would play it on special occasions, inviting guests to experience the captivating melodies that took them on a magical journey. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the garden, Eleanor invited a young girl named Clara to her cottage. Clara had heard tales of the legendary music box, but had never seen it in action. Eleanor, her eyes twinkling with anticipation, welcomed Clara into her cozy cottage. She carefully lifted the music box from its special display case, treating it as though it were a precious gem. The craftsmanship of the music box was unlike anything Clara had ever seen before. It was adorned with polished wood, adorned with intricate carvings, and studded with glistening gems. Eleanor wound the music box with a graceful, practiced hand and opened the lid. As the first notes danced into the air, the room seemed to transform. The walls shimmered and the garden outside came to life with vibrant colors and twinkling fireflies. Eleanor and Clara watched in awe as they were transported to a land of wonder. The music box's melodies carried them through a forest filled with talking animals, across crystal-clear streams, and to a grand castle where a king and queen were celebrating their daughter's wedding. Clara felt as though she had stepped into a fairy tale, and the enchantment of the music box was more real than she could have ever imagined. They danced with fairies in a moonlit glade, listened to the wisdom of ancient trees, and soared on the backs of majestic eagles over snow-capped mountains. Clara and Eleanor marveled at the breathtaking landscapes that unfolded before them, each one more wondrous than the last. As the night wore on, the music box's melodies led them to a magical lake, where the water sparkled with the reflection of 1,000 stars. It was there that they met a wise old mermaid who sang a hauntingly beautiful song about the power of dreams and the importance of cherishing the beauty of the world. As the last notes of the mermaid's song faded into the night, the room began to return to its former state. The garden outside, once alive with magic, was now bathed in the soft glow of the moon. Eleanor smiled at Clara, knowing that the music box had worked its enchantment once again. She had shared with Clara the cherished secret of her family's heirloom, a secret that had the power to transport those who listened to its melodies into a world of dreams and magic. Clara left Eleanor's cottage that evening, carrying the enchantment of the music box with her, forever grateful for the unforgettable journey she had taken. She knew that she had been given a rare gift, the opportunity to experience a world of magic and wonder, and Eleanor, the guardian of the magical heirloom, continued to share its enchanting melodies with those who believed in the power of music to open the door to an enchanted world. The story of the music box and the adventures it offered was passed down through generations, becoming a cherished part of the family's legacy. Each person who experienced its magic carried with them the knowledge that dreams could come alive with the turn of a key and the opening of a lid. In the heart of a quiet, quaint town, nestled between the misty hills and shrouded in an eerie silence, there stood an abandoned mansion. For years, the locals had whispered tales of the house's dark history, and it had become a place of both fear and fascination. It was a house that had remained untouched for decades, and its secrets lay dormant in the dust-covered corners of time. On a cold, moonless night, a group of paranormal investigators, led by the intrepid journalist Sarah, gathered outside the mansion's towering wrought-iron gates. Sarah was known for her relentless pursuit of the unknown, and she had heard the whispers of the house's spectral inhabitants for years. She believed the time had come to confront the chilling legends head-on. The group entered the mansion with cameras and recording equipment, determined to capture evidence of the paranormal. They moved through the dark hallways, their footsteps echoing eerily as they explored room after room, their breaths visible in the frigid air. As they ventured further into the heart of the mansion, they stumbled upon a room filled with old photographs and handwritten letters. The photographs depicted a family that had once called the mansion home, but the letters revealed a story of tragedy and despair. The family had been plagued by misfortune, their lives spiraling into madness and darkness. Just as the investigators were piecing together the history of the mansion, the cameras began to malfunction. Screens flickered with static and eerie whispers filled the air. It was as though the spirits of the past were trying to communicate their tormented tale. Sarah's determination only grew stronger. She pressed on, undeterred by the supernatural forces at play. The group ventured deeper into the house, descending into the basement where an unsettling chill hung heavy in the air. In the dim light, they saw the outlines of strange symbols etched into the walls, symbols that appeared to have been drawn in blood. As they continued to investigate, they heard disembodied voices whispering unintelligible words. Their flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was clear that something malevolent was watching, and it was not pleased with their intrusion. Suddenly, one of the investigators let out a blood-curdling scream. His camera captured a shadowy figure, lurking in the corner of the room, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly malevolence. The entity seemed to materialize out of thin air before vanishing just as quickly. The investigators scrambled to escape the basement, but the mansion had other plans. Doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The temperature plummeted, and a deafening, otherworldly shriek reverberated through the house, causing the walls to tremble. Desperation set in as they tried to force their way out, but the mansion seemed to be a living, breathing entity, intent on keeping them within its sinister embrace. It was as though the very walls were closing in, ready to claim them as the latest victims of its tragic history. The investigators fought to survive, using every ounce of their strength to confront the malevolent forces that had been unleashed. In the end, some escaped with their lives, forever haunted by the chilling events they had witnessed. But Sarah, the fearless journalist, remained trapped within the mansion, her determination and curiosity leading her to a terrifying fate that would become yet another part of the mansion's dark and chilling history. And so, the abandoned mansion continued to stand as a silent sentinel, its secrets preserved in the chilling footage captured by the investigators' malfunctioning cameras. The house, with its tragic past and malevolent spirits, remained a place of fear and fascination, waiting for the next group of curious souls to unlock its terrifying mysteries. The setting sun cast a warm, golden hue over the vast cornfields that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was harvest season in the small farming town of Millville, and the air was filled with the sweet, earthy scent of ripe corn. However, beneath the idyllic surface, a chilling secret lurked. In the heart of Millville, there stood an old, dilapidated barn known as the Harvest House. Its history was shrouded in mystery, with the townsfolk whispering tales of strange occurrences and eerie phenomena that had plagued the place for generations. It was the year 1963, and two best friends, Sarah and Tom, had heard the rumors about the Harvest House for years. They were known as the most adventurous kids in town, always up for a dare. On this fateful autumn evening, with a full moon illuminating the cornfields, they decided to uncover the truth once and for all. With flashlights in hand, they ventured into the cornfields, their footsteps rustling through the tall, dry stalks. The moonlight danced on the corn leaves, casting eerie, shifting shadows. The whispers of the breeze seemed to carry strange, otherworldly voices that sent shivers down their spines. After a seemingly endless trek through the corn maze, they reached the Harvest House, its rotting wood creaking ominously in the night. The door was partially ajar, as if beckoning them inside. With a mixture of dread and determination, they stepped in. Inside, the barn was filled with antiquated farming equipment, their rusty forms looming like silent sentinels. Cobwebs hung like drapes, and the air was thick with a musty, oppressive humidity. As they cautiously explored, the barn seemed to shift and change. Its dimensions distorted, and corridors appeared where none should have been. The friends heard faint, mournful cries in the distance, and an overpowering sense of sorrow gripped them. They followed the eerie sounds through twisting passageways until they came upon a haunting sight. In a dimly lit chamber, they found an old, rusted threshing machine, and surrounding it were the spectral forms of ghostly farmers, their faces etched with pain. Sarah and Tom gasped in horror, realizing they had stumbled upon a nightmarish scene of the past. These apparitions were the trapped souls of farmers who had met a gruesome end in a cornfield accident many years ago. The spirits toiled endlessly, their spectral hands pushing the threshing machine, their wails a chilling testament to their eternal suffering. In their desperation to escape, the two friends inadvertently released the tormented souls from their spectral servitude. The Harvest House quaked and groaned as the trapped spirits dissolved into the night, their mournful cries echoing through the cornfields. A dreadful silence descended, and the barn returned to its rotting, abandoned state. Sarah and Tom fled the Harvest House, but the weight of their actions and the harrowing sights they had witnessed stayed with them. The haunting specters were gone, but the cornfields would forever bear the scars of their dark history. As they emerged from the corn maze and the moon dipped below the horizon, they looked back at the now forlorn Harvest House. The once secret terrors of Millville had been laid bare, a stark reminder that the past's dark secrets were sometimes best left undisturbed, even in the most tranquil of settings. In the year 2021, on a stormy autumn night, Michael found himself on an isolated stretch of Highway 66 in the remote town of Hollowbrook. The clock on his car's dashboard read 1:37 a.m. as he maneuvered through the winding, rain-soaked roads, desperately trying to reach his family's cabin nestled deep in the woods. The rain was unrelenting, falling in heavy sheets, obscuring his vision and making every turn treacherous. Adding to his anxiety, his fuel gauge was perilously close to empty, and he had no cell phone signal to call for help. After hours of relentless driving, he spotted a weather-beaten road sign indicating the presence of a rest area just up ahead. Fatigue weighed heavily on him, and he longed for a break from the harrowing journey. The cabin was still a couple of hours away, and the hope of a warm cup of coffee and a brief respite from the storm was enough to keep him going. Finally, the rest area came into view, an oasis of dimly lit solace in the midst of the storm. Raindrops created a shimmering pathway to the entrance, dancing on the wet pavement. Michael parked his car and sighed with relief, grateful for a moment's respite from the relentless downpour. Inside the small rest area building, he was greeted by an eerie silence. The flickering fluorescent light cast long, sinister shadows across the worn linoleum floor. It felt abandoned, but a flickering neon sign above the counter indicated that the coffee machine was operational. Michael approached it, welcoming the warmth and familiarity of the task at hand. As he poured a cup of coffee, he heard a shuffling noise behind him, and a chill crept up his spine. He turned to find a hooded figure standing in the shadows, their face concealed by the hood. The stranger's eyes gleamed with a malevolent glint, and an uneasy silence hung in the air. "Hey there," Michael stammered, attempting to break the silence. "I didn't expect to see anyone here. It's a hell of a night, isn't it?" The hooded figure remained silent, the atmosphere growing more tense with each passing moment. Michael, growing increasingly uneasy, turned back to the coffee machine and hastily filled his cup. When he turned around again, the stranger had vanished, leaving Michael with a sense of eerie disquiet. As he was about to exit the rest area, the sound of an ominous switchblade opening behind him shattered the silence. He slowly turned to see the hooded figure brandishing the glinting blade, a menacing look in their eyes. "Oh, hand over your wallet!" The hooded figure hissed, their voice a venomous whisper, the blade gleaming ominously in the dim light. Fear coursed through Michael's veins as he reached for his wallet, but he hesitated, buying time to formulate a plan. Just then, the rest area's door burst open, revealing a police officer who had taken refuge from the storm, gun drawn and ready. "Drop the knife!" the officer shouted, the tension in the room reaching its peak. The criminal hesitated briefly, then dropped the weapon and raised their hands in surrender. The police officer swiftly apprehended the would-be robber and called for backup, as Michael watched, still trembling from the ordeal. He realized that he had narrowly escaped a terrifying situation. The police officer informed him that the criminal was a wanted fugitive, responsible for several violent robberies in the area. Justice had finally caught up with them, and they would now face the consequences of their actions. Relieved and grateful for the timely arrival of the police officer, Michael resumed his journey to the cabin, forever haunted by the memory of that suspenseful, scary night at the rest area. The rain had not relented, but the fear that had gripped him began to wane as he continued through the storm. When he finally reached the cabin, a haven of warmth and light welcomed him. The scent of the wood-burning stove filled the air, and he felt a deep sense of relief. He had made it, and he was safe. In the following days, He relished the tranquility of the cabin, taking long walks in the woods and listening to the rain pattering on the roof. He couldn't help but reflect on that fateful night at the rest area, and the stark realization of how close he had come to danger. One evening, as he sat by the fire, there was a breaking news report on the television. The criminal who had confronted him at the rest area was on trial, facing multiple charges for his violent crimes. Michael watched as the verdict was delivered and justice was served. It was a satisfying feeling, knowing that the dangerous criminal was off the streets and would no longer pose a threat to others. Michael knew that he had played a small but crucial part in making that happen by reporting the incident to the police. It was a lesson he would carry with him, a reminder of the importance of speaking up and taking action in the face of danger. As he watched the news report, the rain continued to fall outside, but he felt a sense of closure and peace. The memory of that suspenseful and scary night at the rest area would stay with him, but so would the knowledge that he had played a part in bringing a criminal to justice. In the small rural town of Pineville, nestled deep within the heart of Idaho, life had a quiet and unhurried pace. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and unusual incidents were rare. I was 18 years old back in 2017, and I had just graduated from Pineville High School. With no grand plans for the future, I decided to stick around and work at my family's small general store. One sweltering summer day, a series of events unfolded that I'd remember for a lifetime. I had been working the afternoon shift, stocking shelves and ringing up the occasional customer when a familiar face entered the store. It was my childhood friend Sarah, who had moved to the bustling city of Boise a few years ago to attend college. Sarah was back in Pineville for a short visit, and we decided to catch up over lunch at the local diner. We spent hours reminiscing about old times and sharing stories of our recent adventures. As the afternoon turned into evening, Sarah suggested that we take a drive to one of our favorite childhood spots, a secluded lake in the nearby woods. With the sun beginning to set, we set off in my modest yet reliable 2000 Ford Ranger pickup truck. The dirt road leading to the lake was bumpy, surrounded by tall trees, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead. As we reminisced about our youth, we failed to notice that the truck's gas gauge was teetering on empty. The truck suddenly sputtered and the engine died. Panicked, but not entirely surprised by my negligence, I tried to restart the engine, but it refused to cooperate. My heart sank as I realized our predicament. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone signal to call for help. We could either walk back to town, which was miles away, or hope for a good Samaritan to come our way. We decided to wait for a while, hoping for a kind soul to pass by. The minutes felt like hours as we watched the twilight fade into darkness. It seemed as though everyone in Pineville had gone to bed early that evening. No one was coming to our rescue, and the eerie silence of the forest weighed heavily on us. Just when we were beginning to lose hope, the distant hum of an engine reached our ears. A pair of headlights appeared through the trees, growing steadily closer. A worn-out pickup truck pulled up, and a middle-aged man with a sinister grin greeted us. He introduced himself as Dave, a local logger who happened to be driving back from a job site. He was a stocky, bearded man with a rugged appearance that hinted at a life spent working in the woods. Dave offered to give us a ride back to town to fetch a can of gas, which he insisted was a common occurrence in this remote area. With immense relief, we hopped into Dave's truck. However, as we drove deeper into the woods, a sense of unease settled over us. Dave's cheerful demeanor had vanished, replaced by an unsettling silence. Dave took a sudden turn down a narrow, overgrown trail. Panic surged through us as we realized we were heading away from Pineville, not toward it. He spoke in cryptic, menacing tones, and our fear intensified with each passing moment. With a menacing glint in his eye, Dave turned to us. "Now, it's time for you two to understand the gravity of your situation." Sarah and I exchanged nervous glances, realizing we had fallen into the clutches of a cold-blooded serial killer. Our hearts raced as we contemplated the perilous circumstances we were now entangled in. Dave's eyes bore into us as he detailed his gruesome plans. He spoke of his past victims, his methodical approach to their capture, and the macabre trophies he collected from each encounter. Fear pulsed through our veins as we realized the horrifying fate that awaited us if we didn't act swiftly. With our hearts pounding and our minds racing, we seized a fleeting moment of distraction. As Dave rambled on, Sarah, who was seated in the back of the truck, subtly reached for a heavy toolbox, her fingers wrapped around a wrench, a makeshift weapon that could potentially be our lifeline. In a split-second decision, I feigned sudden illness, clutching my stomach and groaning in pain. Dave, momentarily taken aback, leaned closer to assess my condition. It was the opening we desperately needed. Sarah's hand shot out from behind the seat, wielding the wrench. With all her strength, she swung it toward Dave's head. The wrench connected with a resounding thud, causing him to cry out in pain. His grip on the steering wheel faltered, and the truck veered wildly off course, crashing into a tree. The collision jolted all of us, and the night erupted with chaos. As the truck came to a halt, I scrambled for the door handle and tumbled out into the darkness. Sarah followed suit, and together we sprinted into the dense woods. Behind us, Dave groaned, disoriented from the crash. His menacing plans were momentarily derailed, and we seized the opportunity to distance ourselves from the truck and the man who had sought to do us harm. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, and every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent shivers down our spines. We ran, adrenaline coursing through our veins, with Dave's enraged shouts echoing behind us. Branches scratched at our arms and legs, and our breaths came in ragged gasps. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we stumbled upon a small, seemingly abandoned cabin. We had no idea who lived there, but we had no other choice. Desperation fueled our actions as we banged on the door, hoping for a refuge from our pursuer. To our immense relief, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman who had lived in the cabin for decades. She ushered us inside, and we explained our harrowing ordeal. She offered us protection and assistance, making sure we were safe from Dave's clutches. Meanwhile, the sound of sirens grew closer, and law enforcement descended upon the forest, guided by our frantic call for help. Dave was apprehended, his reign of terror coming to a bitter end. Our escape from the clutches of a serial killer was a nightmarish ordeal, but our resourcefulness, determination, and the unexpected help of a kind stranger had saved us from an unimaginable fate. The forest, once a symbol of tranquility, became the backdrop for our terrifying escape and ultimate survival. The Johnson family had been looking forward to their road trip for months. It was meant to be a peaceful escape from their busy lives, a chance to bond and make lasting memories. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the desolate road stretched ahead of them, their peaceful adventure took a chilling turn. It had been a long day of driving, and the family found themselves on a remote stretch of highway with no gas station in sight. The gas gauge stubbornly hovered just above E, and anxiety set in. What was supposed to be a fun journey had suddenly become a nerve-wracking ordeal. As the car came to a sputtering halt, John, the father, sighed in frustration. The nearest gas station was miles away, and the darkness of the night was descending like an ominous shroud. They had no choice but to wait. His wife, Sarah, insisted that he should go and fetch the fuel. She assured him that she and the kids would be fine waiting in the car under the glow of the full moon. John reluctantly agreed, kissed Sarah and their 2 children, Lily and Ethan, on their foreheads, and embarked on the long walk to the gas station. The minutes turned to hours, and the car grew colder with each passing moment. The wind outside howled like a mournful cry, and Sarah wrapped her arms around the kids, doing her best to keep their spirits high. They played games and told stories to pass the time, but an underlying unease lingered in the air. As the night deepened, a bone-chilling sensation washed over Sarah. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She peered out into the inky darkness surrounding the car but saw nothing. It was as if the very night itself was observing their predicament. Just as she was about to dismiss her fears as mere imagination, she heard a soft tapping on the car window. It was faint at first, but it grew more insistent. Lily and Ethan, wide-eyed with fear, clung to their mother. Sarah's heart pounded as she turned to see a figure standing in the moonlight just beyond the window. It was a man, but something about him was terribly wrong. His face was pale and gaunt, and his eyes were empty, devoid of any emotion or humanity. His ragged clothes hung from his skeletal frame, and his fingers scratched against the glass like the claws of a desperate creature. Terror coursed through Sarah as she locked eyes with the grotesque figure. She started the engine, determined to get away from the horror that had emerged from the night. As the car roared to life, the figure let out a guttural, mournful wail, and she hit the gas pedal. The car tore down the highway, leaving the nightmarish figure behind. Sarah could feel her children's hearts racing in tandem with her own. They were safe, but the memory of the horrifying encounter lingered, a chilling reminder of the dangers that could emerge in the darkness. Finally, hours later, John returned with the much-needed fuel. His family, still trembling with fear, recounted the eerie experience they had endured. John could hardly believe their story, but he knew one thing for certain. Their road trip would never be the same again. The highway, once a symbol of adventure, now held a dark secret that they would never forget. And the memory of that night would forever haunt their family's travels. Once upon a chilling night in the small, close-knit town of Brooksville, 4 friends found themselves trapped in a horrifying nightmare that unfolded after a birthday celebration. They had gathered to celebrate Sarah's 25th birthday, and the festivities were filled with laughter, music, and dancing. As the clock ticked past midnight, the party showed no signs of slowing down. It was Emma, one of Sarah's closest friends, who first noticed the dwindling gas gauge in Sarah's car as they continued to celebrate into the early hours. The house was in a secluded part of town, and the nearest gas station was miles away. Laughter turned to concern as the friends realized their predicament. Sarah decided to take charge. She, along with her friends Emma, Jake, and Maya, decided to set out to find a gas station that was open at this hour. They piled into her car and embarked on their eerie journey into the dark, deserted roads of Brooksville. The town had always had an air of mystique about it, but on this night, the atmosphere felt downright sinister. The winding roads were cloaked in inky darkness, and the howling wind added to the eeriness. Their headlights cut through the gloom, casting eerie shadows on the gnarled trees that lined the road. As they ventured deeper into the desolate countryside, the friends began to feel a creeping unease. The moon was hidden behind a shroud of heavy clouds, leaving the landscape obscured and unwelcoming. Emma, who had a penchant for the supernatural, couldn't help but share some local legends she had heard about the town. "These woods are rumored to be haunted by the spirits of the early settlers," Emma said, her voice trembling. "They say strange things happen here at night, and sometimes people disappear without a trace." Nervous laughter rippled through the car, but there was a palpable tension in the air. Maya glanced out of the window and spotted a dilapidated farmhouse in the distance. Its sagging roof and shattered windows looked like something out of a horror movie, and they passed by it in uneasy silence. They continued down the winding road, growing increasingly anxious as the gas gauge crept closer to empty. The dark, winding road seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, and the world outside had taken on a surreal, otherworldly quality. Then, a haunting sight appeared on the horizon. A flickering, rusted sign for a gas station emerged from the darkness like a ghostly apparition. With relief, Sarah pulled into the station's decrepit parking lot. It was eerily silent, and the dim, buzzing neon lights created eerie shadows that danced in the breeze. The friends exited the car and made their way to the ancient gas pumps. They were surprised to find that they still seemed to be operational. As Sarah began to refuel the car, Jake wandered over to a weathered payphone mounted on the wall, the cord dangling eerily in the breeze. "Check this out, guys," he called out. "An old payphone. I haven't seen one of these in years." He lifted the receiver, and to their shock, it emitted a low, crackling dial tone, a sound straight from the past. The friends exchanged puzzled glances. But then a voice on the other end whispered a single word. "Leave." Startled, they turned to see a group of eerie, shadowy figures emerge from the darkness. Their faces were obscured and they moved with an eerie, synchronized grace. They approached slowly, their intent unclear. Panic surged through the friends as they hurriedly retreated to their car. But as they scrambled inside, the figures continued to close in on them. Their hollow eyes stared blankly through the car windows, and the friends could see that their faces were contorted in expressions of eternal suffering. Sarah turned the key in the ignition, praying for the engine to roar to life. But it remained stubbornly silent. The figures inched closer, their whispers now a cacophony of eerie voices that sent shivers down the friends' spines. In a final act of desperation, Sarah tried the old payphone. The voice on the other end, now clearer and more urgent, pleaded with her to leave, repeating that there was no escape from the sinister entities that surrounded them. With trembling hands, Sarah slammed down the receiver and tried the car's ignition once more. This time, the engine roared to life, and with tires screeching, they sped away from the gas station. The horrifying figures disappeared into the darkness, their ghostly wails fading into the night. As they left the sinister gas station behind, the friends couldn't shake the feeling that they had encountered something otherworldly, something that would forever haunt their memories of Sarah's ill-fated birthday party. Once they were back home, safe and sound, they gathered in Sarah's living room, their faces pale and haunted. As they recounted the night's events, they couldn't help but wonder what had happened in that eerie, abandoned gas station. The unanswered questions remained, but one thing was certain. They had ventured into a nightmarish realm, one that defied explanation, and they were lucky to have escaped with their lives. And as they finally found solace in the safety of Sarah's home, the memory of that harrowing night served as a chilling reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some places should never be visited after dark. In a quiet, small town nestled in the embrace of rolling hills, there lived a woman named Claire. She was a hard-working nurse who dedicated her life to caring for the sick and the wounded. Claire's shifts were long and grueling, often extending well into the dead of night. It was during one such late-night shift that she found herself embroiled in a chilling and horrifying tale. One particularly frigid winter night, Claire's shift ended at the ungodly hour of 3 a.m. Exhausted and drained, she longed for the warmth of her home and her comfortable bed. The drive back was routine, a familiar route she had taken countless times before. However, the harsh winter had a different plan that night. As Claire made her way down the desolate, snow-covered road, she glanced at her fuel gauge and felt a pang of dread. It was far lower than she had anticipated. The nearest gas station was miles away, and anxiety settled in as she considered the possibility of running out of gas in the dead of night, far from help. The moments stretched into eternity, and Claire's car sputtered and coughed before finally coming to a standstill on the side of the road. She was out of gas. The cold seeped into her bones as she cursed her bad luck. There were no other vehicles in sight, and her phone displayed a no service message, leaving her feeling isolated and vulnerable. With a heavy heart, Claire decided to leave her car behind and make the long, treacherous walk to the nearest gas station. She wrapped herself in her coat and stepped out into the icy darkness. The only sounds were the crunch of snow under her boots and the distant howling of the wind. As she trudged through the snow-covered landscape, Claire's imagination began to play tricks on her. She thought she saw eerie shapes moving in the shadows and heard strange, indistinct whispers carried by the biting wind. Panic gripped her, and she quickened her pace, her heart pounding. The journey felt endless, and Claire's surroundings became increasingly surreal. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the snow-covered ground. She stumbled upon an abandoned, dilapidated farmhouse that stood as a grim sentinel in the moonlight, and shivers ran down her spine. She had no choice but to venture inside in search of shelter as the cold threatened to overwhelm her. The interior was even more haunting, with shattered windows, creaking floorboards, and cobwebs that draped like curtains. The air was heavy with the weight of memories long past, and Claire couldn't help but feel that she was not alone. As she ventured deeper into the farmhouse, the whispers grew louder, the voices becoming clearer. She was not alone. The spirits of those who had once lived here surrounded her. Their ethereal presence an undeniable reality. They spoke of tragic events, of a life filled with despair and sorrow. Claire listened in terror, her breath misting in the icy air. Claire knew she needed to continue her journey, to reach the gas station and escape the haunting farmhouse. With newfound determination, she pushed onward, through the dilapidated rooms, and out into the frigid night once more. Hours later, she finally reached the gas station, her feet numb and her body trembling from both the cold and the ghostly encounter. Claire filled a canister with fuel and returned to her car, eager to leave the nightmarish farmhouse and its spectral inhabitants behind. As her engine roared to life, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits she had encountered that night had somehow imparted a piece of their tragedy onto her. The horrifying encounter would forever haunt her dreams, a chilling reminder that the darkness of the night can reveal the hidden horrors that lurk just beyond the edges of our reality. Unfolded Mysteries. It was a dark and stormy night when 5 friends, Sarah, Mark, Jenny, Robert, and Lisa, embarked on a weekend getaway to celebrate Sarah's birthday. They had booked a historic Airbnb, Hollywood Manor, in the secluded woods of Whispering Pines. Little did they know that their choice would lead to a night of unspeakable horror. As they arrived at the manor, the imposing structure loomed out of the darkness, its Gothic architecture shrouded in ivy and mystery. The wind howled through the ancient trees, and a sense of unease settled over the group. The host, a somber man named Mr. Hawthorne, handed them the keys and warned them to be cautious. "The manor has a history," he said, his eyes filled with foreboding. "Some say it's haunted." The friends laughed it off, attributing his warning to a quirky attempt at creating atmosphere. They entered the manor, greeted by the creaking of floorboards and the faint, eerie whisper of the wind. The air inside felt heavy with a sense of foreboding. They explored the grand yet dimly lit rooms with their antique furniture and faded portraits of the manor's long-forgotten residents. The grand staircase led to a labyrinth of hallways, each one darker and more labyrinthine than the last. As they settled into their rooms, they couldn't help but notice the oppressive silence that enveloped the manor. Their evening began with laughter and camaraderie, but it soon took a sinister turn. The lights flickered and dimmed, and strange shadows seemed to move on their own. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways, and disembodied whispers filled the rooms. The friends dismissed it as their imagination running wild, blaming it on the eerie ambience of the manor. But as the night deepened, the haunting became more tangible. Doors slammed shut on their own, and the chill in the air was no longer just from the weather outside. Sarah, who had always been sensitive to the supernatural, began to feel a presence watching her. A pair of ghostly eyes seemed to follow her, appearing briefly in reflections in dark corners and in mirrors. Jenny, a skeptic, suggested they hold a seance to communicate with any spirits that might be present. They gathered in a candlelit room, their breath visible in the frigid air. The atmosphere grew tense, and as they called out to the spirits, a cold, bony hand brushed against Lisa's cheek. Panic erupted, and they fled the room, leaving the seance incomplete. It was clear that they were not alone in Hollywood Manor, and whatever dwelled there was not friendly. The friends decided to leave, but as they reached the front door, it slammed shut, trapping them inside. They were forced to return to their rooms, the eerie presence growing stronger with each passing minute. Sarah, feeling the weight of the supernatural world pressing down on her, reached out to Mr. Hawthorne for help, but he was cryptic in his response, only telling her that they needed to confront the spirits before they could leave. As the group reassembled in the candlelit room, they heard a mournful wail, a lament that seemed to come from deep within the manor. The room grew icy cold, and the candles flickered wildly as a figure began to materialize in the center. It was the ghostly apparition of a woman, her eyes filled with sorrow and her dress tattered and blood-stained. She beckoned them forward and, in a chilling voice, she revealed her tragic tale. She had been a servant of the manor, wronged and betrayed in life, and her spirit was forever bound to the place. The room seemed to blur and distort, and the friends felt as though they were transported to the past, witnessing the events that had led to the woman's demise. It was a harrowing and heartbreaking experience, and they realized that she sought not to harm them, but to share her story to find redemption for her soul. With the revelation of her story, the manor seemed to sigh with relief. The oppressive presence that had haunted them began to dissipate, and the friends felt a sense of closure. The spirit of the woman thanked them and slowly faded into the darkness. As dawn broke, the manor was quiet, the supernatural occurrences having ceased. The friends left Hollywood Manor forever changed by their night of terror. The legend of the haunted Airbnb spread far and wide, a tale of a birthday celebration that had turned into a night of unspeakable horror, and a reminder that some places carry a darkness that can only be exorcised through the sharing of long-buried secrets. David had always been a workaholic, and when his job sent him on a last-minute business trip, he was determined to make the most of it. The quaint coastal town of Marigold Cove, known for its serene beaches and picturesque landscapes, seemed like the perfect place for some respite. He booked an Airbnb, a cozy cottage nestled among the pines, hoping for a peaceful and productive stay. As he arrived at the cottage, the salt-laden breeze filled the air, and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the coastal landscape. The cottage itself was idyllic, its white walls and blue shutters blending seamlessly with the picturesque surroundings. However, as he entered, an unshakable sense of unease settled in his chest. The cottage was quaint but dimly lit, and the decor was a curious mix of vintage and modern. The paintings on the walls depicted forlorn faces, and the furniture seemed to carry a heavy history. David couldn't help but notice the pervasive smell of salt water and an eerie hush that clung to the rooms. As night fell, he decided to settle in. He turned on the television, but the channels were filled with static and the sound was distorted, making it unwatchable. Frustrated, he switched it off and attempted to use his laptop, only to find that the Wi-Fi signal was weak and intermittent, making work nearly impossible. Resigned to the situation, David decided to get some rest. He climbed into the antique four-poster bed, but the mattress was lumpy and uncomfortable. As he closed his eyes, the night seemed to grow even darker, the silence oppressive and absolute. Then he heard it, a soft, mournful humming that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Startled, he sat up, his heart pounding. The sound grew louder, a haunting melody that echoed through the cottage, but the source remained elusive. David reached for his phone to call the Airbnb host, but it had no signal. He felt trapped, and as the humming continued, it began to take on a spectral quality, as if it was being sung by an ethereal presence. Fear gnawed at him, and he left the bedroom, determined to find the source of the eerie humming. The sound led him to a small, dusty attic door at the end of a narrow hallway. Hesitantly, he pushed it open and climbed the rickety stairs into the dimly lit space. In the attic, he discovered an old gramophone, its horn crackling with static. A record spun on the turntable, playing a mournful melody from another era. But what chilled him to the bone was the ghostly figure seated before the gramophone, her back to him, her long, disheveled hair obscuring her face. As David approached, the figure turned slowly, her eyes empty and filled with sorrow. She extended a bony hand toward him, her fingers clawed and skeletal. In a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the afterlife, she whispered, "Help me." Terror gripped David as he stumbled back down the attic stairs, fleeing from the apparition. He could feel her presence following him, her cold breath on his neck. He made his way to the front door, only to find it locked and unyielding. Panic surged through him as he desperately tried to escape the haunted cottage. Hours passed, but the cottage seemed to have become a prison, its rooms shifting and distorting like a malevolent maze. David's phone remained lifeless, the Wi-Fi signal non-existent, and the spectral humming continued to echo through the air, growing louder and more oppressive. As dawn broke, David was found by a neighbor who had heard his frantic screams. The police arrived and helped him leave the cottage, but the ghostly figure remained, her mournful presence lingering in the coastal air. In the days that followed, David's story of the malevolent rental in Marigold Cove spread through the town. The cottage was shunned by the locals, considered cursed and uninhabitable. David, forever scarred by his ordeal, could never shake the memory of the haunting presence that had turned his business trip into a nightmarish encounter with the supernatural. Officer John Anderson was known for his rational and unshakable demeanor, but even the bravest of hearts can be tested when confronted with the unexplainable. It all began when he decided to take a well-deserved break and booked a secluded Airbnb rental in the serene town of Pinevale. John had recently solved a difficult case, and the constant stress of his job was taking a toll on him. He yearned for a peaceful getaway, a place where he could rest and recharge. The Airbnb listing for an idyllic cabin in Pinevale seemed perfect. The cabin was nestled in a forest clearing, and the serene surroundings were just what John needed. His host, a kindly woman named Mrs. Reynolds, greeted him with a warm smile. She showed him around the cozy cabin, explaining its features and leaving him with the key. As John settled into the cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was heavy with silence, and shadows seemed to move in unnatural ways. The atmosphere was eerily still, almost as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. That night, John retired to his bedroom, his service pistol within arm's reach. He had always been cautious, even in his private life. Just as he began to drift off to sleep, he was jolted awake by the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. John's instincts kicked in, and he reached for his weapon. As he moved cautiously down the hallway, he found the front door slightly ajar. A shiver ran down his spine. He was certain he had locked it. He ventured outside into the moonlit forest, but there was no one to be seen. The night was strangely quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of nature. John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The following night, the strange occurrences escalated. John was awakened by a whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was a voice, faint and distant, repeating a name, Abigail. It sent a chill down his spine. Abigail was a name from his past, a case that had haunted him for years. It was an unsolved mystery, and John had never forgiven himself for not being able to find the missing girl. As he continued to hear the name, he realized that the voice seemed to be emanating from an old, dusty journal he had found on the cabin's bookshelf. The journal belonged to Mrs. Reynolds' daughter, who had vanished years ago. John had seen pictures of the girl, and she bore a striking resemblance to the ghostly apparition that had haunted his nights in the cabin. It was as though the spirit of Abigail was trying to communicate with him. The cabin's haunting escalated each night, with objects moving on their own, strange shadows appearing on the walls, and eerie voices whispering in the dark. John, always the rational cop, began to lose his grip on reality. One night, he awoke to find the apparition of Abigail standing at the foot of his bed. She seemed to be pleading with him, her eyes filled with sadness. It was then that he knew he had to solve the mystery, to bring closure to both Abigail's spirit and his own tormented soul. With the help of the journal, John pieced together the final moments of Abigail's life. He discovered that she had come to the cabin to seek refuge, only to be met with tragedy. The journal contained cryptic clues, pointing to a hidden room in the cabin. As he entered the hidden room, he uncovered a shocking truth. Mrs. Reynolds had been responsible for Abigail's disappearance, and the cabin held the key to unlocking the dark secret. It was a chilling revelation that shook John to his core. With the evidence in hand, he contacted the local authorities, and Mrs. Reynolds was arrested. The cabin was no longer haunted, and the restless spirit of Abigail seemed to find peace at last. John returned to his job as a police officer, forever changed by the haunting experience in the Airbnb rental. He had not only solved a long cold case, but also faced the supernatural head-on. It was a reminder that even the most rational minds could be tested by the unknown, and sometimes the answers lay in the darkest corners of the past. Unfolded mysteries. The wind howled through the dark streets of Hollowbrook on Halloween night. The town was known for its long history of eerie tales and unsettling legends, but none was more chilling than the story of Michael and his girlfriend Eliza. Michael was a young man with a love for Halloween. He adored the spooky ambience, the costumes, and the sense of escapism that the holiday provided. Every year, he and Eliza would prepare meticulously for the annual Halloween party, choosing their costumes and decorations with great enthusiasm. But this year was different. Eliza had passed away in a tragic accident just a few months before, leaving Michael shattered and alone. He was determined to honor her memory by attending the Halloween party they had always enjoyed together. As he donned his costume, an elaborate skeleton suit that he knew she would have loved, he couldn't help but feel her absence acutely. Eliza had always been the life of the party, the one who embraced the spooky spirit of Halloween with unbridled enthusiasm. The party was in full swing as Michael arrived at the large Gothic mansion where it was held. As he entered the dimly lit, cobweb-draped entrance, a sense of unease settled over him. The partygoers seemed to revel in the macabre, their laughter and costumes taking on an eerie, almost sinister quality. Michael mingled with the guests, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Eliza's spirit was with him, watching over his shoulder. As the night wore on, the revelry became more frenzied, and the mansion seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Michael retreated to a quieter part of the mansion, a dimly lit library lined with dusty old books. It was a place of relative solitude, away from the madness of the party. But as he gazed at the antique mirror that adorned one wall, he couldn't escape the feeling that Eliza was there, just out of sight. It was when he saw her reflection in the mirror that his heart skipped a beat. Eliza stood there as vivid as ever, her eyes filled with sorrow. She was dressed in her favorite Halloween costume, a ghostly bride, the very one she had worn the last time they had celebrated Halloween together. "Michael!" she whispered, her voice a faint echo from the beyond. "Why did you come here? You should have stayed away." He reached out to touch the mirror, to feel her presence once more, but his hand passed through the glass as if it were nothing more than an illusion. The room grew cold and the lights flickered ominously. Eliza's form began to distort in the mirror, her image twisting and contorting into something monstrous. Her once loving eyes turned malevolent, and her ghostly gown became tattered and blood-stained. She began to wail, a mournful cry that pierced Michael's soul. Panicked, he stumbled back from the mirror, but Eliza's reflection remained, taunting him with its grotesque transformation. The library seemed to close in around him, the walls lined with portraits of long-dead ancestors who stared down at him with accusing eyes. As the night wore on, Michael's descent into madness continued. He saw Eliza's ghostly figure everywhere, in the flickering candles, in the haunting music, and in the leering faces of the partygoers. Her voice whispered in his ear, a tormenting lament that spoke of betrayal and sorrow. In his terror, Michael fled from the mansion, but the town itself seemed to conspire against him. The streets twisted and turned, leading him in endless circles, and the moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting eerie shadows that danced around him. Desperate and disoriented, he stumbled into a forgotten cemetery at the edge of town. The gravestones loomed like silent sentinels, and the night was filled with the cries of distant, unseen creatures. Eliza's ghostly figure appeared once more, her spectral hand reaching out to him, beckoning him to join her in the eternal shadows. In his final moments, Michael fell to his knees, his sanity shattered, and his spirit broken. He felt Eliza's cold, ghostly touch on his cheek as the world around him dissolved into darkness. The Halloween party, with all its macabre revelry and unsettling spirits, had claimed him as its own, a victim of the haunting power of the holiday. To this day, the legend of Michael and Eliza is told in hushed tones in Hollowbrook. It serves as a chilling reminder that on Halloween night, the boundary between the living and the dead can blur, and the spirits of lost loved ones may return to claim those who dare to cross into the realm of the supernatural. On the night of Halloween, a full moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the town of Hollowsville. For months, the town had been buzzing with anticipation for the grand Halloween party at the Hollow Oak Mansion, an abandoned and decrepit estate known for its dark history. 4 couples, longtime friends, were particularly excited about this year's event. They had heard the legends surrounding the mansion, the tales of unexplained disappearances, mysterious noises, and eerie apparitions. But the allure of a Halloween party at the Hollow Oak Mansion was too enticing to resist. The couples arrived in style, dressed in elaborate costumes that ranged from vampires to classic horror movie characters. They parked their cars on the overgrown driveway, surrounded by dense woods, and made their way to the ominous entrance of the mansion. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air grew heavy with dread. The flickering candles lining the grand hallway cast elongated shadows that danced on the peeling wallpaper. A chill seeped into their bones as they explored the sprawling labyrinthine mansion, each room more unsettling than the last. As the evening unfolded, the couples mingled with other guests, their laughter and footsteps echoing through the dimly lit halls. The grand ballroom, adorned with tarnished chandeliers and moth-eaten drapes, was the centerpiece of the party. But as the hours ticked away, the atmosphere in the mansion grew increasingly unsettling. It was Claire, one of the partygoers, who first noticed it. A mournful wailing sound that seemed to emanate from the depths of the mansion. She turned to her husband, Mark, and whispered, "Do you hear that? It sounds like someone is crying." Mark listened carefully, and indeed, the eerie sound of sobbing filled the air. The other couples had also caught wind of it, and they exchanged uneasy glances. Together, they decided to follow the source of the haunting cries. Their curiosity piqued. The wails led them to a decaying library, its shelves lined with dusty, forgotten tomes. In the center of the room stood a grand, ornate mirror, its surface dark and foreboding. In front of the mirror, a spectral figure wept, her pale, translucent form clad in a blood-stained wedding gown. As the friends stared in terror, the ghostly bride turned toward them, her eyes filled with torment. She beckoned them closer, her voice a haunting whisper that spoke of love, betrayal, and unspeakable tragedy. The tale of her ill-fated wedding and the gruesome events that followed chilled the friends to the bone. The bride, it turned out, had been married to the mansion's owner, a cruel and twisted man. Her wedding night had ended in a gruesome murder at his hands, and her spirit had been trapped in the mansion ever since. The mansion itself was cursed, and the apparitions of its tormented residents haunted those who dared to enter. The friends, gripped by fear and empathy, vowed to help the tormented bride find peace. She begged them to retrieve her wedding ring, which her husband had hidden away as a cruel reminder of their unholy union. The couples embarked on a nightmarish journey through the mansion's maze of shadowy corridors, encountering vengeful spirits and witnessing horrific scenes from the mansion's dark history. It was a harrowing ordeal that tested their courage and strained their relationships. Eventually, they found the hidden chamber where the wedding ring was kept. But as they reached for the ring, the malevolent presence of the mansion intensified. The friends were trapped, their escape blocked by an unseen force. The apparitions closed in, their ghostly forms twisting and writhing with anger. Just when it seemed that all was lost, Claire remembered an old Halloween tradition she had heard about as a child. The power of love and unity could dispel malevolent spirits. The friends clasped hands and with unwavering determination recited their love for one another. The words of love echoed through the mansion, causing a blinding burst of light. The vengeful spirits were cast back, their wails and cries dissipating into the night. The friends were released from the mansion's malevolent grip, and the ghostly bride, with tears of gratitude in her eyes, finally found peace. As they emerged from the cursed mansion, they couldn't help but feel a sense of connection and camaraderie that had been forged in the crucible of terror. They knew that the haunted tales of Hollow Oak Mansion would remain with them forever, a testament to the enduring power of love and friendship in the face of the supernatural. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the friends returned to the town of Hollowsville, forever changed by their harrowing Halloween experience, a story to be shared and retold for years to come. It was Halloween night, and a chill hung in the air as three college roommates, Alex, Rachel, and Luke, gathered in the dimly lit living room of their off-campus apartment. An air of anticipation surrounded them as they prepared to embark on a night of spine-tingling stories and eerie games. Their apartment had always been known for its peculiarities. Strange creaks in the floorboards, flickering lights, and inexplicable drafts were part of everyday life. But on Halloween, with the moon casting an eerie glow through the windows, the three friends couldn't resist indulging in some terrifying tales. As the night deepened, they huddled on the worn-out couch, the flickering candles creating dancing shadows on the walls. Alex, the storyteller of the group, began to narrate the legend of Room 13. Room 13, he began in a hushed tone, was the last room at the end of the corridor in an old, abandoned hotel. It was said to be cursed, haunted by the spirit of a woman who had met a tragic end. As Alex spun his tale, Rachel and Luke exchanged uneasy glances. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, and the wind outside seemed to moan in response to the story. The tale of Room 13 unfolded. The room, it was said, was always icy cold, no matter the weather outside. Guests who dared to stay there reported feeling an otherworldly presence, as if someone was watching them. And the mirror in the room held a chilling secret. It was rumored that those who gazed into it at midnight would see the reflection of the vengeful spirit who haunted the room. Rachel couldn't help but shiver as Alex described how the room's guests had gone mad, their voices whispering to the invisible presence that surrounded them. Some claimed to have seen the ghostly figure of a woman in a blood-soaked gown, her eyes filled with anguish. As the story reached its climax, the lights in the apartment flickered, and a sudden draft sent a chill through the room. The three friends exchanged startled glances, but Luke dismissed it as a mere coincidence. They decided to test the legend of Room 13 and the haunted mirror to prove it was just a story. They found an antique mirror in the corner of the living room and brought it to the dimly lit hallway. With bated breath, they waited until the clock on the wall struck midnight. Rachel held the mirror, and the three friends stared into its depths. Their reflections seemed distorted, wavering in the dim light. As the minutes passed, Alex began to laugh nervously, assuring his friends that the tale of Room 13 was nothing but an old legend. But then, Rachel's reflection began to change. Her eyes darkened, her expression twisted in agony, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. The mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the lights flickered violently as if in protest. In the aftermath, they found Rachel unconscious on the floor. They called for an ambulance, and the paramedics rushed her to the hospital. As they waited for news of her condition, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had unwittingly awakened something malevolent in their apartment that Halloween night. When Rachel finally regained consciousness, her memory of what had happened was fragmented. She could only recall seeing her reflection change in the mirror and feeling a profound sense of dread. She insisted that it wasn't just a hallucination. It was as if the spirit from Room 13 had tried to take hold of her. From that night on, the three roommates were forever changed. The inexplicable occurrences in their apartment grew more frequent, and the sinister presence that had been awakened seemed to linger in every shadow. As the years passed, the tale of Room 13 became a chilling legend told in hushed tones among the students of their college, a reminder that some stories are best left untested. The roommates had learned the hard way that, on Halloween night, the line between the living and the supernatural can blur, and the consequences of delving into the unknown can be more terrifying than any ghost story. Unfolded Mysteries. In the heart of East Africa, where the rhythms of nature and human life harmoniously intertwined, I found myself falling deeply in love with a man whose every action seemed to be a symphony of mystery and intrigue. We had shared 3 years of blissful togetherness, marked by laughter and love. Yet, like a shadow lurking in the corners of our life, there was one peculiar and unsettling mystery that surrounded my husband, a secret he held close and hidden from me. My husband was a man of many virtues. He was charming, considerate, and devoted to our life together. We seemed to share everything except for one enigmatic quirk that remained a baffling enigma. He had an unspoken rule that defied explanation. He would not speak with me over the phone after 11 p.m. This strange boundary he had set for himself was paired with his unwavering dedication to his early morning gym sessions, which required him to rise before dawn. It was a curious aspect of his life that I couldn't ignore, an itch of suspicion that I couldn't help but scratch. The first time it happened, I brushed it off as a minor eccentricity, perhaps linked to his relentless commitment to physical fitness. His explanation of needing a good night's sleep before hitting the gym made sense, but over time my doubts grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something, a secret that he couldn't or wouldn't share with me. Our life together continued to flourish, filled with joy and shared experiences. But the nagging suspicion about his late-night habits, his predilection for rising before dawn, and his peculiar obsession with the clock's hand inching past 11 p.m. persisted. It was as if he had a clandestine life, shrouded in darkness, while our days were bathed in sunshine. Then, one fateful night, a restless sleep jolted me awake. The room was cloaked in darkness, and my heart raced as I realized that my husband was not beside me. An icy chill ran down my spine, and a deafening silence settled over the room. Its oppressive weight intensifying with every passing second. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed the eerie absence of his presence. And then it happened. An unsettling sound, an otherworldly voice echoed from the vicinity of our bed. Fear mixed with curiosity, and my instincts urged me to investigate. I inched closer, straining my eyes in the dim light, trying to discern the source of this unearthly sound. What I saw defied all reason and logic. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted, was undergoing a grotesque transformation. His body twisted and contorted, and long, sinister nails sprouted from his fingers. His once familiar face distorted into a grotesque blend of human and something indescribably otherworldly. In the face of such unimaginable horror, I watched in silence as he slipped out from under the blanket. He moved with an unnatural grace, something that couldn't be human. It was as though he had become a nightmarish creature, slipping away from me in the dead of night. I was paralyzed, unable to move or stop him. My husband, the man I thought I knew, had become a monstrous enigma. He left the room, and I was left alone with the haunting image etched into my mind. The following morning, I confronted him, my voice trembling as I begged for an explanation. I implored him to help me understand the unfathomable truth I had witnessed, but he vehemently denied any knowledge of the nightmarish transformation, as though he were entirely innocent. Panic and confusion enveloped me as I grappled with the horror of the situation. My husband's secret, the transformation that had shaken the core of my understanding, remained shrouded in darkness. It was as though he was guarding an otherworldly enigma that I was not meant to comprehend, unable to shake the nightmarish image. I resolved to follow him on the subsequent nights, determined to uncover the truth. Like a sinister ritual, each night at precisely 3 a.m., I heard the same eerie voice, and I witnessed the same horrifying transformation. My husband's body contorted beneath the blanket. His face became a grotesque mask, and he slipped away with eerie grace, vanishing into the night. Night after night, I bore witness to the incomprehensible. My husband ventured out into the dark, mysterious world where I eventually uncovered the spine-chilling truth. He was spending time with hyenas in the nearby graves. It was a revelation that left me trembling, and the spiritualists I consulted explained that he was afflicted by an inherited family spirit, an ancestral curse that bound him to these malevolent encounters. Once my husband realized that I had discovered his darkest secret, he disappeared from my life, leaving only unanswered questions and an unshakable sense of dread. I never saw him again, and the story of the man I had loved, who transformed into a creature of the night, remained a nightmarish enigma that haunted my memories of East Africa. In search of solace and a fresh start, I made the life-altering decision to move to the United States. The vast expanse of the ocean that separated me from my past was a welcome relief, but it couldn't sever the emotional ties that bound me to the memory of my husband. Even in my new home, the torment of my dreams persisted. Night after night, my slumber was invaded by the image of my husband's grotesque transformation. It was as though the horrors of East Africa had taken root in my subconscious, refusing to release their grip on my mind. As I navigated my new life in the United States, I tried to put the past behind me, but the specter of my husband's monstrous secret continued to shadow my every step. The enigmatic and terrifying experience I had lived through remained a part of me, a story I could never forget, no matter how far I had traveled. It was a story that left me with countless questions and a deep sense of unease, a mystery that would continue to haunt my thoughts and dreams. In a quiet, sleepy town nestled at the edge of a dark and ancient forest, my life was forever altered by the enigmatic secrets that lurked in the shadows. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the world of the living brushed against the realm of the supernatural. I had recently moved to this town, seeking a peaceful retreat from the hustle and bustle of the city. The house I had purchased, a charming cottage surrounded by tall, ancient trees, seemed like the perfect haven for someone yearning for solitude. Little did I know that this quaint town held its own set of mysteries, some of which would soon become inextricably linked to my own life. As the days turned into weeks, I couldn't help but notice the peculiar habits of my neighbors. They were friendly, warm, and welcoming during the daylight hours, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, a hushed unease settled over the town. It was as though an unspoken curfew was in place, and everyone hurried to lock their doors and draw their curtains. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I began to investigate. In hushed conversations with the locals, I learned of the town's most closely guarded secret: the existence of creatures that prowled the night. They spoke of shapeshifters, entities with the power to take on the form of animals, bound by an ancient curse that forced them to remain hidden in the dark hours. The tales grew even stranger when I heard of a sacred tree in the heart of the ancient forest, a tree said to hold the key to unlocking the shapeshifters' power and breaking their curse. The legend claimed that anyone who found the tree and made a wish under its twisted branches would be granted a single chance to confront the supernatural and uncover the truth. Determined to unravel the mysteries that surrounded me, I ventured deep into the forest one moonless night. The air was thick with an uncanny stillness, and the darkness seemed to thicken as I delved deeper into the woods. My only guide was the eerie luminescence of fireflies that flickered around me. It was a long and treacherous journey filled with strange sounds and unsettling sensations. As I pressed forward, I felt as though the trees themselves were watching, their gnarled branches reaching out to grasp at my soul. Eventually, I stumbled upon the sacred tree, its ancient roots extending deep into the earth. I could feel the weight of centuries of secrets hanging in the air. Gathering my courage, I made my wish, a wish to confront the shapeshifters, to learn the truth, and to bring an end to the town's nocturnal mysteries. In an instant, the world around me transformed. The moon cast an ethereal glow, and the forest seemed to come alive with movement. Shadows shifted, and I could hear whispers on the wind, murmurs in a language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the very ground I stood on trembled, and the tree before me twisted and contorted. From its roots emerged a being unlike anything I had ever seen. It was a creature of the night, a shapeshifter with eyes that glinted like polished obsidian. The shapeshifter and I locked eyes, and it began to speak. It told me of the curse that bound them to the night, of their desire to break free from its chains. It shared tales of their existence, of the sacrifices they made to protect the town from malevolent forces that threatened to encroach in the darkness. As the shapeshifter spoke, I realized that the town's secrets were far more complex than I had ever imagined. It was a delicate balance between the living and the supernatural, a balance that had been maintained for generations. With newfound understanding, I made a choice. I decided to keep the shapeshifter's secret, to honor the sacred pact that had preserved the town for so long. In return, the shapeshifter granted me a single haunting vision of their world. It was a world of shadow and magic, a world that existed just beyond the veil of human perception. When I awoke the next morning, I found myself back in my cottage, bathed in the soft, warm light of day. The mysteries of the town remained hidden, but I carried with me the knowledge of a secret world, a world of shapeshifters and ancient curses, a world that would forever linger in the back of my mind. The quaint town continued to thrive, and life moved on, but the midnight secrets that bound it together remained hidden in the obscurity of the night, waiting for the next curious soul to uncover their enigmatic truths. Part 1. The Attraction Beckons. In the quiet, suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge, there was a house that, for the vast majority of the year, remained as inconspicuous as any other. It blended into the community with its modest facade, hiding its true nature until October arrived. For a fleeting 2-year period, the house transformed into a pop-up haunted attraction that drew thrill seekers from all over the region. Unofficially known as Haunted Hill Housey, the attraction earned its peculiar moniker due to an oddly placed sign procured from a nearby party city. Planted in front of what was essentially a grassy patch that was designated as a parking area, the sign added a touch of the macabre, spelling out the attraction's name in deliberately exaggerated and misspelled letters. It was this sign that beckoned people, enticing them to enter the mysterious world of Haunted Hill Housey. The parking area, more symbolic than practical, came to life each October, with the grass serving as the only parking space. This year marked the attraction's last hurrah, the end of an era that had entertained and frightened guests for 2 memorable years. It was during this farewell season that our story takes place. Part 2. The Night of Discovery. Our tale revolves around 4 friends, Matt, Michael, Eddie, and our protagonist. They ventured to the Haunted Hill Housey on a chilly Thursday night. The uniqueness of college life allowed them to have Fridays off, making it the ideal time for a visit, as the attraction would be less crowded than the weekends. Their journey to the house was uneventful, and as they arrived, they couldn't help but notice the absence of a line at the ticket stand. Even the line at the entrance was surprisingly short, with just a handful of people ahead of them. The anticipation grew with every step, but an unexpected twist awaited them as they reached the entrance. Only one person was allowed inside at a time. It was a perplexing development, one that they assumed would intensify the fear factor. With a touch of humor and some reluctance, they pushed Michael to lead the way. The tension in the line mounted as they realized they'd be left in suspense, not knowing what lay ahead. Part 3. A World of Fear. As our friends entered the attraction, they found themselves enveloped by darkness. The path was illuminated mainly by small, flickering lights that cast eerie shadows on the gruesome props, which included mutilated corpses and horrifying scenes.
actors in terrifying costumes would emerge sporadically, sending shocks of fear through the group. Each jump scare took them by surprise, and the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. However, things took a disturbing turn when our protagonist, while navigating a dark hallway, felt a presence behind them. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, pushing them further down the corridor. Initially, they thought it was part of the act, but the fear escalated as the figure's intentions remained unclear. The pushing ceased, and a door closed behind them, leaving our protagonist alone in the darkness. The realization that this was not part of the attraction sent shivers down their spine. With caution, they took out their phone against the rules and turned on the flashlight. What they saw in the dimly lit room was a tall figure dressed entirely in black. With a face mask covering half their visage, the figure was chillingly silent. As minutes passed, the situation remained unnerving. No one came to progress them through the attraction. This wasn't part of the act. Something was very wrong. Our protagonist, who hadn't set foot in a haunted house since childhood, began to panic. The darkness was suffocating and the silence was deafening. Finally, they decided to use their phone to navigate back through the attraction, but the experience had been profoundly unsettling. They were haunted by the encounter with the enigmatic figure and its ominous presence. Part 4. Confronting the Unknown. Emerging from the attraction, our protagonist rejoined their friends and reported the disturbing incident to the staff. They all felt a mixture of fear, confusion, and anger, unable to comprehend how this could have happened in a supposedly controlled environment. The next day brought shocking news. A fellow college student had posted on Facebook about her own horrifying experience at the same haunted house. It was an incident that bore eerie similarities to what our protagonist had gone through. She had been assaulted by someone who seemed to have infiltrated the attraction, raising questions about its security. The story spread like wildfire, and the attraction quickly became a subject of controversy and scandal. The victim pressed charges against the owner, alleging negligence in providing adequate security. The staff maintained that the assailant didn't work for the attraction, but the damage was done, and the attraction was shut down that month. The unsettling events of that night left an indelible mark on our protagonist. It was a night they would never forget, one that would forever make them wary of haunted house attractions and remind them of the darkness that could lurk in the most unexpected places. This tale serves as a chilling reminder of the fine line between thrills and danger, and how the sinister can sometimes creep into the most seemingly innocent experiences. It explores themes of fear, the unknown, and the impact of traumatic events, echoing with a sense of unease that lingers long after the attraction has closed its doors. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, there stood a charming two-story house that I shared with my younger brother. My brother occupied the lower floor while I claimed the upper level as my own. Despite being in my early 30s, I often found myself alone, as my brother frequently spent his time at his friend's house. On a particular evening, I was nestled in the spacious living room, engrossed in a thrilling suspense movie. The open layout of the living space made watching such films alone a bit unsettling, especially when I had my back exposed to a significant portion of the room. The dim glow of the TV cast eerie shadows, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder repeatedly, more often than I'd care to admit. Once the movie ended, I decided it was time to call it a night. I ventured into the hallway to switch off the lights, casting the upper floor into darkness. I was 2 hours into my peaceful slumber when I was abruptly woken at 1 a.m. by a faint, unfamiliar voice echoing from downstairs. The voice had a striking resemblance to my brother's, but it was strange because he was supposed to be at his friend's place on the other side of town. Still groggy and bewildered, I tiptoed down the dark hallway toward the kitchen, where the voice continued, now calling out my name. My brother's absence puzzled me, and when I flicked on the kitchen light, no one was there. A sense of unease gnawed at my mind as I ventured into my brother's empty room. Just as I was about to dismiss the incident as a trick of my tired mind, a mysterious sound caught my attention. It was a soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the corner of the room. Startled, I hurried back to my room, clutching my phone. I tried to call my brother to make sense of the situation, but my calls went unanswered. Locked in my room, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something inexplicable had occurred. I had never experienced hallucinations or sleep disturbances before, which left me deeply perturbed by the vividness of the strange encounter. The unsettling sensation lingered, casting a long shadow over the rest of that restless night. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the unsettling memory of that strange night. My brother returned home, completely unaware of the incident, and life seemed to return to normal. Still, a lingering sense of unease accompanied me, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to that night. Was it just a trick of my mind, a vivid dream that had felt all too real? Or was there something else at play? I decided to dig deeper, to unravel the mystery that had haunted me. Late one afternoon, as I was perusing the local library for answers, I stumbled upon a book about paranormal encounters in the area. The chilling stories described strange voices, mysterious whispers, and inexplicable occurrences in houses just like mine. They left me with a shiver down my spine. I was not alone in my experience. I decided to reach out to some neighbors, and to my astonishment, a few of them had their own eerie tales to share. They described faint voices in the night, shadowy figures, and unexplained phenomena. It seemed that our tranquil neighborhood held more secrets than met the eye. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into research about the history of our house and the land it stood on. As I combed through archives, I stumbled upon a series of unsettling events that dated back decades. There had been a tragic fire that had claimed the lives of a family that once lived on the same plot of land. Could the whispers and eerie voices be the echoes of the past, trapped in the very walls of my home? I couldn't be sure, but it was a theory that haunted my thoughts. As days turned into weeks, I sought out the services of a local paranormal investigator. Together, we conducted a thorough investigation of the house, using equipment to detect any unusual activity. The results were inconclusive, but the investigator couldn't deny the heavy atmosphere that seemed to hang in the air. There was an undeniable feeling that something beyond our understanding resided within the house. In the end, I had no choice but to learn to coexist with the unexplained. My brother and I continued to live in the charming 2-story house, but it was no longer just a home. It was a place where the past and present intertwined, a place where we shared our lives with mysterious echoes that refused to fade. The nights were still restless, and the shadows still danced, but I couldn't help but wonder if the spirits of the past were trying to communicate something that remained just beyond my grasp.
Story 1. I work as a cemetery operations coordinator, but you can just call me a cemetery manager. Part of my job involves sitting down with visitors and family members of the deceased to assist in setting up funerals and facilitating the sales of burial plots. One day, a man in his early 30s named Antonio, a very spiritual individual, approached me to purchase a burial plot for his ailing father who was in hospice care. Antonio, with a thick Hispanic accent, had a deep sense of compassion that was evident in his eyes. He shared pictures of his father, a kind and gentle-looking man who seemed far too young to be taken away from his family. Sadly, Antonio's father's time came that very week, and Antonio arranged for the funeral service at the cemetery. The day of the funeral was stormy, which many consider a sign of good luck. As the funeral procession briefly stopped in front of the office building, I stepped outside under the awning and saw Antonio in the car following the hearse. We exchanged waves, acknowledging each other's presence. Due to the inclement weather, I returned indoors until the procession was ready to proceed to the burial site. I hopped into one of the cemetery pickup trucks and followed the procession to the final destination, where I stood with my umbrella, ensuring the smooth flow of the funeral service. After the funeral, I took a few rounds around the cemetery in the truck, a routine I performed a couple of times a day. With a pile of paperwork and the task of closing the cemetery that night, I headed back to my desk to attend to my responsibilities. The cemetery's closing time was 5:30, and as darkness approached, I drove around one last time to confirm that all visitors had left. Then I drove to the front gate to lock it. It was an unusually warm early March evening, and the days were still relatively short. On this particular stormy day, it felt like night had already fallen by closing time. As I was driving back to my office, I thought I saw someone hastily walking down one of the paths among the tombstones. They turned and disappeared behind a hedge. In response, I honked my horn to signal that the cemetery was closed. Strangely, I never saw that person again. I grabbed my umbrella and ventured out into the rain, following the path the person had taken. I reached the hedge they had turned behind, and from there I peered down a long row of tombstones on one side and hedges on the other. To my surprise, there was no one in sight. I searched in the rain for a good 20 minutes, but eventually had to give up. Back in the office, I reviewed the CCTV footage. None of it captured any unusual movement, perhaps due to the storm and darkness outside. While multitasking between the camera and my paperwork, I suddenly heard the front door of the visitation room slam shut. Jumped from my chair and called out a greeting, thinking that perhaps it was the same person I had seen earlier, locked inside the cemetery and looking for assistance. I stepped into the lobby, but there was no one there. I called out again, and then I noticed the door to the visitation room had been closed. I started searching all the windows, but found nothing. I had no choice but to give up after a thorough search. I drove back to my office, collected my belongings, and locked up. Before leaving, I made one more pass around the cemetery to ensure all visitors had left. Finally, I secured the front gate and drove home. When my wife asked why I was unusually quiet, I simply attributed it to a long day at work. To this day, I'm inclined to believe that my mind was playing tricks on me due to overwork, but the whole experience is still unsettling to think about. Story 2. My name is Jeremy, and this incident occurred in the heart of October during a chilly and windy evening. I reside in a somewhat sizable town characterized by its old and dilapidated early 18th century buildings. One night, my friend and I were seeking some thrill around 3 a.m. We decided to explore a small, eerie cemetery situated about 10 minutes away from my apartment. This cemetery was separated by a highway, occupying about 20 acres of land on both sides. It had a gloomy atmosphere, given its isolation and disrepair. We were intrigued to check out the older part of the cemetery, a section entirely disconnected from the newer area by an old iron fence. The older graves dated back centuries, and it was apparent that no one had visited them in years. After about an hour of wandering around and capturing eerie photographs of the moss-covered graves, we took a break under a massive pecan tree located at the center of the older section. It was then that we heard a young girl's laughter, which seemed unnervingly close to our location. At first, we assumed it might be a toy left on a child's grave, but the sound persisted. While it creeped us out, we continued our exploration. However, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a sensation that lingered throughout our visit. My friend mentioned seeing someone in the shadows of a small wooded area adjacent to the cemetery, and this heightened our unease. As we felt increasingly spooked, we decided to leave and find our way back to the car. But that's when we heard the sound of footsteps crunching on leaves behind us. We quickened our pace and eventually reached the car, which my friend swiftly started. I had never seen him drive so urgently. It seemed as though the eerie laughter was now following us. We arrived at the only gas station open at that hour and checked the back of the car, fearing that something had been placed there to spook us. To our relief, we found nothing, so we hurried back to my apartment. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even after we had left the cemetery. I had a sense of dread that continued to linger in my mind, leaving me uneasy and unable to forget the experience. By Eric Wainwright. Story 3. When I was in my late teens, my friend Sean and I decided to indulge our curiosity and venture into a local cemetery late one October night. We were both seeking a thrill and felt adventurous despite the obvious risks. I'll introduce my friends as Jason and Mark for the purpose of this narration. Jason's place was our rendezvous point, and he lived relatively close to the cemetery. Our initial plan was to explore the cemetery and capture spooky photos on our cameras. We parked Jason's car in a secluded lot across the street from the cemetery entrance, as it was past midnight, and the area was practically deserted. We were confident that no one would witness our little escapade. We hopped over the cemetery's fence, which was relatively easy to scale, and ventured into the gloomy graveyard. The only source of light was the flashlight on our phones, allowing us to see only a few yards ahead. Our separation in the cemetery was intentional, as we were aiming for a more suspenseful experience. While exploring the cemetery, I felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was observing us from the shadows. My instincts led me to search the surrounding woods, but I found no sign of anyone or anything unusual. As I began to search for Jason and Mark, I heard a loud noise nearby. I immediately turned towards the source of the sound and saw an older man, possibly in his mid-50s, wearing a black raincoat and jeans with a mustache and gray hair. This man screamed at us to leave the cemetery, sending a shiver down my spine. I was overcome by dizziness and, in an instant, everything went dark. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged through the woods. Panicked and disoriented, I realized that it was Jason who had come to my rescue and pulled me out of the cemetery. As I regained consciousness, I felt a sense of urgency, convinced that something or someone was following us. My friends and I ran back to the car, but when I turned to look back, I saw a figure closely trailing us. It was an eerie and unsettling sight. We made it to Jason's car and quickly hopped in. He accelerated before the engine had fully started, narrowly avoiding an accident as we sped away from the cemetery. We were shaken, but we couldn't find any logical explanation for the encounter. Mark and Jason firmly believed that the man in the cemetery was real and that we had stumbled upon an unexpected visitor. However, my perspective was different. I had been the one who initially encountered the figure, and the way he had appeared and vanished was deeply unsettling. Ultimately, the events of that night left us bewildered and apprehensive. We couldn't definitively conclude whether it was a real person or something supernatural, but the experience left an indelible mark on our memories. By 9rec. Story 4. During my teenage years, my friends and I made a rather foolish decision. I was around 17 or 18 years old, and it was the month of October. In the spirit of Halloween, I yearned for a thrill and suggested that we sneak into a nearby cemetery. For the purpose of this story, let's call my friends Steve and Dave. We gathered at Steve's house, and he had abstained from drinking. He would be the designated driver for our expedition. The plan was to explore a local cemetery and capture some spooky photos. We parked Steve's car in a desolate lot across the street from the cemetery. It was well past midnight, and the area was devoid of any onlookers. We felt confident that our escapade would go unnoticed. We effortlessly scaled the cemetery's fence, which was only about 3 or 4 feet high, and ventured into the eerie graveyard. The only source of light was the flashlight on our smartphones, allowing us to see only a short distance ahead. To enhance the thrill, we decided to separate and explore different sections of the cemetery. As I began to navigate the cemetery, an overwhelming sensation of being watched crept over me. It felt as though something or someone was lurking in the shadows, observing our every move. My instincts led me to scan the surrounding woods, but I found no trace of anyone or anything unusual. Intent on reuniting with Steve and Dave, I headed in their direction. To capture the eerie ambience, I began recording a video with the flashlight on my phone. It was then that I noticed something unusual on my phone screen. I froze in horror as I saw a woman dressed in a white gown or dress with long gray hair. She was initially gazing down at the ground, but when I looked up, she had vanished. Terrified, I started backing away from the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. Curiosity got the better of me, and I looked back at my phone screen, only to find the woman there again, this time staring directly into the camera. The eerie feeling intensified, and it was clear she was moving closer to me. Panic overtook me, and I began to scream for Steve and Dave while sprinting away from that spot. I couldn't see their lights anywhere, and they didn't respond to my frantic cries. Determined to leave the cemetery, I ran back to the fence and managed to hop over it. Finally, I reached Steve's car and called out to them, urging them to leave immediately. Minutes later, Steve and Dave joined me in the car. We were all visibly shaken. As I showed them the video, they had the same horrified expressions I did. The video revealed the moment the woman slowly lifted her head to look directly at me and began to move closer. Story 5. A few years ago, my beloved grandpa passed away. We were always very close, and on his birthday, which happened to fall in July, I decided to visit his grave at the cemetery. The cemetery he and my grandma had chosen was approximately an hour's drive from my apartment, and my family had already paid their respects earlier in the day. I arrived at the cemetery on a rainy, gloomy day, and the somber atmosphere only added to the melancholy of the occasion. The gatekeeper requested the plot number, which I provided, allowing me to enter the cemetery. It was a reasonably large cemetery, and as I hadn't been there as the driver before, I had difficulty locating my grandpa's grave. The cemetery was almost deserted, which wasn't surprising given the weather. I eventually found my grandpa's headstone, parked my car on the grass nearby, and placed some fresh flowers on the grave. I stood there for a while, closed my eyes, and offered a heartfelt prayer. Upon finishing my prayer, I opened my eyes and glanced around. To my astonishment, I saw an older man standing a few rows away, directly across from me. He was looking right at me, and there was an uncanny familiarity about him. I couldn't believe my eyes as he appeared to be my grandpa. My heart skipped a beat. But when I looked away and then back at the spot, he had vanished. I was left in a state of disbelief, my skin prickling with goosebumps. Overwhelmed and uneasy, I quickly made my way back to my car, silently whispering my love to my grandpa. I drove away from the cemetery, but my head was pounding, and I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something unusual had transpired. As I headed home, I experienced a strange headache, which was quite unusual for me. I recalled that I had fainted only once before in my life, and it had happened that night at the cemetery. I didn't understand the cause, but it was a profoundly unsettling experience. Later that night, my phone rang at around 2 a.m. The call came from an unknown number, and my heart raced as I answered it, fearing it might bring distressing news. The call was filled with static, and I could barely make out any words. Yet for a brief half-second, I thought I heard my grandpa's voice amid the crackling. I attempted to respond, but my voice was trembling, and I was too shaken to articulate a coherent response. The call abruptly ended, leaving me with a sense of unease and a racing heart. The next day, I contacted my phone provider to trace the number, but they claimed they lacked the necessary data to do so, which left me with unanswered questions. The events of that day and night were the most unsettling experiences I had ever encountered. I couldn't determine whether my grandpa had attempted to communicate with me or if my overactive imagination was playing tricks on me. Despite the uncertainty, the memory continues to haunt me. We hope you enjoyed those spine-tingling tales as much as we did. If you're still feeling a little spooked, don't worry, you're not alone. But before we say goodbye, we have a few things to ask of you. If you've got a creepy cemetery story of your own, please share it with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your experiences and encounters. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you found these stories as chilling as we did. It really helps our channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already. There are plenty more eerie adventures waiting for you right here, so you don't want to miss out. Share this video with your friends and fellow thrill seekers. After all, spooky stories are best enjoyed with company, right? That's a wrap for today, but stay tuned for more bone-chilling content in the future. Until next time, remember to keep your flashlight handy, your wits about you, and always be ready for the unexpected. Thanks for joining us on this haunting journey. Take care and may your nights be eerily entertaining. See you in the next video.